Gayle Kennedy was born in Ivanhoe in New South Wales. She is a member of the Wongaiibon Clan of the Ngiyaampaa speaking nation of southwest New South Wales. She is an award-winning author of Me, Antman and Fleabag, which is a marvellous novel, a road trip, hilarious. She has been the Indigenous issues writer and researcher for Streetwise Comics, believe it or not, from 1995 to 1998. She's in huge demand at literary events and workshops right across Australia and internationally. And she speaks on the issues of disability and culture. But most extraordinarily, she's just published 5 children's novels with no less a publisher than the Oxford University Press. She will be signing her books in the break immediately after this, so don't miss that. Could you please give a warm welcome to Gayle Kennedy?
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I hope you don't mind me reading from this, but as I get older, I find I can't remember everything. So basically, I'm going to give you a little bit of a story about my life from my earliest memories. One of my earliest memories, and one verified by my mother and various relatives, is of standing on a table surrounded by smiling people as I sang the old country song, "I Want a Pardon for Daddy." The faces are beaming, encouraging. The faces are black. My next memory is being trapped inside an iron lung that segues into a leafy garden and a little boy called Brian. Both of us are victims of polio. Neither of us can walk. We call each other Mummy and Daddy. We have created our own little world. We swim each day in a hydrotherapy pool filled with soothing emollients for the benefit of a little girl who has been burnt from head to toe. The little girl is allowed into our world during these sessions. We are 3 little children who have no idea that there are others out there in the world who are strong and able, with smooth skin undamaged by savage flames, and with limbs that obey the commands of their brains. We are spoilt and cosseted by the nurses, the orderlies, the cook Linda. The rehab hospital is our castle, and we are the rulers. We are the unassailable kings and queens of this leafy, clean, white world. We are already acquiring the mind skills we are going to need if we are to survive all that the world has in store for us, the different, the damaged. We pay no heed to how others see us. All that matters is how we see us. I see no other black faces over the 3 years I'm in the rehab hospital. Everyone around me is white. There are no mirrors. I am reflected solely in the faces of those around me. I never take time to observe the colour of my skin. It is of no consequence in my world. I am, for all intents and purposes, the same colour as everyone else around me. I am happy in my little world, and Brian and I gradually learn to walk and are fitted with our calipers together. Little do we realise that this will mean that we will soon be separated, never to see each other again. Little do I realise that I will soon be thrust without warning into an alien world. The day my world changed is deeply ingrained in my memory. It was up early as usual, breakfast, then bath, but there was something different in my world today. There seemed to be tears in the eyes of the nurses as they collected me for my bath. Today I was dressed in special new clothes, a little pinafore, pretty little jumper, new socks, my calipers polished, a ribbon for my hair. I was excited at the new clothes, but also suspicious. Why the new clothes? Why the tears? Why was Linda the cook fussing over at me at this hour? I usually didn't see her until later in the day. She grabbed me and held me as tight as she could, and I could feel her tears on my face. I began to get alarmed. The head sister then told me I was to meet my mummy and daddy today. Mummy and Daddy? What did they mean by that? Brian and I were Mummy and Daddy, and I told them so in no uncertain terms. But they insisted I was to meet my real Mummy and Daddy, and they were taking me on a long journey. I was going home, they said. What did they mean by this? I was already home. The home you came from before you got sick, they said. Now I was confused and scared. I was taken into a room where there stood two people who seemed to me to be from another planet. They were introduced to me as my Mummy and Daddy. I remember recoiling in horror as they handed me to the strange dark lady. "This is your real mummy," the nurse said in her most soothing voice. But I would have none of it. I screamed, "She's not my mummy, he's not my daddy, they're black." I remember tears streaming down their faces. How they must have hurt. It wasn't their fault they couldn't visit me. They were two black people with no money, living in a world where if you were black, you had to have permits to travel. It wasn't their fault there was no gentle introduction, no orientation, no time to get to know me or me to know them. I was thrust into an alien world with no warning, and they had no idea what to do with this strange, screaming child who looked at them as though they were monsters. I was allowed to say goodbye to Brian, who wept and screamed as much as I did, and then suddenly out of the gates of the only world I knew and into one I had no idea existed. The strange couple carried me, still screaming, into a bustling, noisy, crowded central station, desperately trying to ignore the suspicious stares of the strangers around them. All their soothing and stroking was to no avail. I continued to weep as we boarded the train. Soon we pulled out, and we were passing through suburbs with poky backyards, with grey washing flapping on the lines that stood like drab sentinels in the backyards that lined the train tracks of a late 1950s Sydney. Then we were in the countryside, and my childish interest was piqued. Cows, sheep and horses grazed in green paddocks. I'd only seen them in books before. I stopped crying long enough to ask if they were real. The two strange people grasped the chance to connect with me at last. Each animal was pointed out, given names. I calmed down and started to relax into the warmth of the dark-skinned lady who, now that I was not struggling and screaming, seemed so soft. Her eyes were big and brown and filled with tears. She stroked my hair and whispered, "We're going home now, baby girl." "Back to the ward?" I asked. "No, baby girl, home to your real home. You have a baby brother and sister. They're called Buddy and Lulla. You have a grandma and a grandpa and cousins. There are horses and dogs. You'll see, we'll take good care of you." The journey seemed to take forever, but the kind, gentle lady held me. I became sleepy and nestled my head into her breast. Her blouse was damp from our intermingled tears. I slept. The next morning, the train pulled up at a small railway station in the middle of nowhere. A few ramshackle houses and what seemed an eternity of red dirt. No trees, just scrub. I remember Connie Francis singing "Lipstick on Your Collar" was blaring out from the station master's radio. We walked away from the station and into an eerie kind of silence. These people really were aliens. They had taken me off to some far-off planet, and I began to whimper in fear. But Dad took me from my mum's arms and hoisted me onto his shoulders, and we continued across the vast expanse of red earth and strange little trees. An emu darted past us, and lying in the shade of the salt bush was a goanna. It was hot, and we seemed to walk for miles. Then I heard the sound of laughter and children's voices carried on the wind. I could hear someone playing a guitar and singing Mona Lisa as we walked into a clearing where there were huts made from scraps, tents and caravans. There were dogs and kids running about, and people who were all the same colour as the people who had brought me here. Soon I was surrounded by these people. A man with silver hair, a dark face and twinkling blue eyes took me from my mother's arms and held me. He whispered, "My little Topsy is home at last." I was passed to Grandmother Edie, then uncles, aunts, cousins, and finally introduced to little people who were my brother Buddy and sister Lulla. My new home was a far cry from the huge, sterile, quiet hospital I was used to. A new caravan had been bought especially for my homecoming, and Dad had built me my own little toilet, blue with cabbage roses cut from a magazine and pasted on the side. Somewhere between the hospital and my new home, something shifted in my small mind. I lapped up the love that was showered on me and soon forgot about the convalescent home. But I still to this day, however, think about Brian and Linda the cook and the little girl with the badly burned body and wonder what became of them. But I came to love my family and we moved to a bigger town with a river and paved streets. Dad bought a block of land and worked for the Department of Main Roads, and I settled into my new life. But little did I realise that this was not the end of the treatment. This was not the end of the tumult and upheaval. In a way, it had only just begun. For the next 10 years, twice a year, I was taken kicking and screaming from my mother's arms for the 17-hour train journey to Sydney, to a place called the Far West Children's Home for further treatment. Twice yearly back into an all-white environment, twice yearly having to undergo a mind transformation in order to cope with my continually changing world. How different were my two worlds. The Far West home in those days was a cold and forbidding place. The playground was all concrete with high fences. No trees, no flowers, no grass, just a solitary hurdy-gurdy sat in that sea of concrete. What was particularly sad was that it was directly across the road from Manly Beach. You could smell the sea, the fairy floss, the toffee apples. You could watch the people laughing and having fun on their big day out. We soon learnt that if you pressed your nose against the wire, people would sometimes take pity and slip bags of lollies to you. It wasn't all dreadful. There were outings and visiting stars of the day to break up the monotony, but mostly we were all subject to the same dreary routine every day. I think that's why I have such a hatred of routine and why I've never fitted into a conventional workforce with all its rules and 9-to-5 mentalities. It was so different from home with all the chaos of a big family. A home where there was noise, animals, a river, grass, trees, and when it rained, the unbelievably beautiful smell of water on dry earth. At home I was black and went barefoot except for school and outings. At the Far West, I was unsure of just what colour I was, and I wore those blasted calipers from 6 in the morning until 7 at night. My family didn't have the money to come and see me, and in a way I'm grateful for that, because while I was there, I was able to adjust to my life as it was without the distraction and upheaval seeing them would have brought. I developed a rich and wonderful gift. I learned how to block out pain with my mind, to adjust my mind to new circumstances. I developed the ability to be in the moment. Where I was where I was. I became a chameleon in a way. I developed a deeply rich inner life. I learned to treasure solitude because alone I could be anyone I wanted to be. My legs may have been encased in calipers in the physical world, but in my inner world, they were strong and muscular, and on my feet I wore delicate silken butter-soft slippers and danced like ballerinas I had seen in films and on stage. Or I was barefoot and ran like the wind across vast expanses of beach and desert. I wasn't tethered to the earth. Oh no, I flew like a bird and rode on magic carpets and looked with pity at the people below who scurried across the earth, harried and worried, and unable to see me smiling down on them. I leapt on strong stallions and rode bareback beside princes and warriors. I never saw myself as disabled. I was unaware of the pronounced limp. I was also surprised when a child or cruel adult pointed it out. I always looked around to see who they were talking about. I may have been momentarily hurt, but never for long. There were too many adventures and romances to be had, and too many imaginary worlds to conjure and inhabit. Lying on the ground, cloud watching, I could see the vapour trails in the jets, the jets left as they streaked across the deep blue sky. I would imagine the people in those planes, wonder at the places they'd been or where they were going. I wondered if I would ever be in one of those planes. Would another little girl one day lie on the ground and watch the vapour trails that a plane I was travelling in and wonder the same thing? I could not countenance a life where this was not possible. There were others who did not share my confidence. I remember my mother asking me, taking me to the doctor, the local doctor, for my dreadful migraines. I was 12. He said to my mother that they should start looking at getting me on a pension before I finished school. My mother said I went into a fury and said, "I don't need a pension, I have a brain." She said she knew that I would be all right from then on. Her and Dad did the very best they had to see that I had the best possible education, for they knew that it would help me achieve my any dreams I had. How right they were. It came as a wonderful surprise when I became a young adult that I too could have boyfriends and know the loving touch and embrace of men, that I could give and receive sexual pleasure. Men loved me. It didn't matter to them that I limped, and they always seemed so surprised when I mentioned it and often looked puzzled at the very idea of me bringing it up. They saw the inner me. I lived a gloriously happy life for many years, full of music, laughter, food, a myriad of friends, but a decision to go home to the country to live would change me. It was wonderful to be with my family and in my country, but I met a man who I thought was wonderful and we got married. But I had married an illusion, for no sooner had that ring been slipped on my finger than he turned into a drunken, violent monster that stole my joy. I eventually gathered my resources and turned to Sydney, but I was flat, emotionally denuded. People said I'd lost my glow. I kept up a front for a while, but the deep hurt and anger I felt about my dreadful marriage was suppressed as I dealt with post-polio syndrome and the loss of mobility that finally put me into a wheelchair. It's hard to pinpoint when my mojo went walkabout, but it's probably when I stopped wearing lipstick and started going out in tracky dacks and T-shirts. I then gave up my beloved Chanel No. 5 and lost interest in flirting, and I couldn't pick up on the signals from interested men anymore. Eventually, I took to sleeping incredibly long hours and sometimes felt so weighted down by the world that the simple act of rolling over in bed became a chore as I lay there with my ear hurting, but lacking the will to simply turn onto my other side. Then my mind, with its infinite capacity for imagination and pleasure, was no longer working, and it became clouded in a sort of miasmic fog that I couldn't imagine my way out of. For the first time that I can remember, I was tethered to the earth and became the merely physical. It was a scary place to be. I sought help, but I could not relate to the white psychology. The drugs I was prescribed didn't help, and drinking only exacerbated the intensely blue feelings I had. I knew I had to find my way back. The alternative was too devastating to contemplate. I needed to look deep inside and reclaim that wild and joyous mind with its infinite capacity to find joy. I needed my emotional flying carpet back again. I needed my silken, butter-soft dancing shoes. They were still there. I was sure of that. I just had to dig through the wreckage to find them again. I started by dredging up the anger and the hatred I felt towards my husband. Although they were dark and murderous and filled with rage, I actually revelled in those intense feelings because they made me feel alive again. I then started to let them go, one by one. Each day I became lighter as I discarded the emotional detritus. Those feelings turned to pity for him. And soon he became featherlight, a featherlight desiccated husk that I simply sent away upon the lightest of breezes. He could no longer hurt me. Then I had to deal with my feelings at the loss of my mobility and come to terms with being in a wheelchair. I could no longer deal with a full-time job, with the constant toil. I had to find new ways of making a living and of living in general. I decided to become a writer and stated my intentions out loud to my friends. By doing that, it was out there in the world. My friends would remind me of my stated intentions. I would not be able to hide. I started by entering competitions, pitting myself against other would-be writers. And to my utter amazement, I started winning. I submitted articles to various newspapers and journals, and they published them. I wrote a book and it was published, and this has taken me all over Australia. I have since written 5 children's books as well as many articles and short stories. I speak at conferences, I give writing workshops, and I teach children. My life is run and organised to suit my needs now and not others. I have a 5-second commute from my bed to my desk. I can wear my nightie to work if I so choose, and be my natural nocturnal way and live my natural nocturnal ways. My friends say I keep rock star hours and know never to call me before 12 noon. I now have my magic carpet and dancing shoes back. I can go anywhere I want now. I am no longer anchored to earth by my past. I have my lipstick, my Chanel No. 5 and pretty dresses back. I have my blokes back. I have my life back. I have my mojo back. I would like to finish by saying that not long ago, I flew to Europe and visited all the places I dreamed of as a child. It was mid-morning and the plane tracked over my hometown. I looked out the window and smiled. I was in the plane that was leaving the vapour trails as I returned from faraway lands. I wondered if there was another little girl looking up and wondering if she would ever be in one of those planes leaving their signature in the sky. I hoped there was, and I hope she held on to her dreams. Thank you very much.